Hey guys, welcome to the Wave Shooter tutorial series. This is tutorial number 5, and we are going to be adding enemy blood, and we are going to be fixing a bug that we found in the enemy. To start off, let's fix the enemy bug. I'm just going to show you the issue when I play it. You'd see everything works normal. You have enemies that move towards the player, but as soon as I shoot them multiple times with lots of bullets, they'll actually move back towards the player, and the knockback won't work. But currently what's happening is we have our velocity that equals its negative velocity, which knocks it back. But if we're in our knocked back state, which is our stun state, and we get hit by another bullet, it sets our velocity back to its original velocity and it moves towards the player. So to fix this, we're going to add an and stun is equal to false. That way, while it's in its knocked back state, the enemy can't get knocked back again. So that just basically fixed that issue, and you can run it and everything works nicely. Okay, so now we're going to be adding enemy blood. So press the plus button right here, and we're going to do other node. We're going to just do CPU particles. And this is basically Godot's particle system. This is a more optimized version of it. I'm actually much more used to this old particle system. So that's what we're going to be using in here. I'm going to call it blood particles. And I'm just going to show you guys the values I found worked best when I'm doing this blood effect. So in the mount, I did 15. I think that works really well for the amount of particles that we have in blood. I'm going to go to time. I'm going to set lifetime to 0.2. Explosiveness equals 1. So what the explosiveness value does, instead of emitting particles constantly, it just emits them in sprays and bursts where it just shoots out particles. And that's going to work well with our blood effects. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to go in drawing. We're going to be setting the texture of our blood effects. So I'm just going to open circle.png. That's what we're using. And you can see that it's pretty big. So what we did here, since this is running in full HD, we can actually scale it down and it'll still look really nice because we're not actually using any pixel scaling. So I went all the way down to scale right here, and in scale amount, I set it to 0.05. And then I also set a little bit of randomness into here, like 0.12, just so you have like a bit of smaller and bigger particles. I also turned gravity right here. We set Y to 0, so gravity is completely switched off. And I went to initial velocity and I set it to 658. So let's set that right here, 658. And you're gonna see these big bursts. But what's gonna happen to keep our blood there, because it's gonna keep emitting no matter what, when we instance the particle, we're actually gonna freeze it. But for now, I'm just gonna set it like this, and then we're gonna set the spread, because you can see that it's very spread out. And so to fix that, I'm gonna go under direction, and I'm gonna set spread to 18.9. And if you don't see direction, if you don't see this direction category, it might be called spread. I think I'm running an older Godot version on this PC, but right now just look for spread or direction when you are programming in the system. So going back to velocity, I also did a lot of randomness for the velocity. So you can see when I set it to 1, you have lots of different speeds of the particles when it's getting emitted. So that's basically what the randomness for the velocity does. And then I set the color. So I'm going to grab our enemy color, and we're going to copy that, and I'm going to paste that in to our color value right here. The problem is we don't want to leave it the same as the enemy color because it's going to be hard to tell. So you can go about setting the color in multiple ways. You can lower the alpha, which you can see you have a lot of overlap, and you'll have brighter and darker spots of it. I liked setting a darker to it, an actual darker tone that wasn't using the alpha value. So what I used was this hex code value right here, 7C1651. And this is the value I use for my blood. You can use any color value you want, but this is the one I found that works for me. So we're gonna add a timer, and what this timer is gonna do is as soon as it's finished, it's gonna pause the node. It's gonna pause all of the blood particles, and it's basically just going to keep them there in that state that they were paused in. The problem is that Godot immediately starts to emit right when that timer hits. So I have to set to a little bit of a lower value. So I did like 0.15. And just do a lower value, a little bit lower from your lifetime, and it should work. So 0.15 works for me. I also set auto start in one shot to true. Then I'm going to connect this timeout signal to the blood particles. But first, I have to make a script. So hit the attach script icon. We can press create button. I hit the timer, and I'm going to call this freeze blood. Now I'm going to connect the timeout back to the blood particles. And you're going to have this signal right here. You can tell it's a signal because it has this little signal icon. Okay, so you guys are going to have to bear with me. I have a lot of different processes that we're about to disable for it. So just to make sure that everything in this blood particle state is going to get shut down. So we're going to do set process equals, we're just going to set that to false. That's a function. And it's basically, if we have anything under the process function, it's not going to be executing any more of that code. We're going to do the same for physics process. You probably don't need to do all of these, but I need to make sure that it gets shut down completely when we're doing this. We're going to do set process input to false. We're also going to do set process internal to false. And we're going to do set process unhandled inputs to false. And we're going to do set process unhandled key input to false. So if you want any idea of how a lot of these processes work, you can just control click and it'll open the docs for you, or you just search the help for them. I'm not sure about all these processes and what they do. I just know that they freeze the node if you use all of them. And I found it on GitHub when you're trying to pause specific nodes. So that's basically how you do that. And we can save our blood scene right here, Control S, and we're going to save it as just bloodparticles.tscn. Now we have our blood particles saved, and it should freeze it when the blood particles are finished. We can test this by just running this scene, and you'll see it in the corner of the screen, and you can see the bloods right here. The nice thing about this is it's going to emit for 0.15 seconds, and then you're going to have this little movement before it actually pauses, and it just, I don't know, it helps with how the game feels. So we're going to go back to the enemy, and I'm going to we're going to preload the blood particles. So we're going to just do var blood particles equals preload, and we're going to find our blood particles. Make sure it's tscn, that's our scene file. So we want to instance blood particles when the enemies die. So under when the HP is less than or equal to 0, above Q free, before we destroy ourselves, we want to do global.instance node blood particles. We want to instance our blood particle scene, and we want to do either global position, and we want global.node creation parent. We want to create it under our node creation parent. But first, before we create our blood particles, we need to check if the node creation parent exists. So we need to do if global.node creation parent is not equal to null, meaning that the node creation parent exists, then we can instance our blood particles. We're going to run this and see if it creates our blood particles. So I'm going to be running the game, and I'm going to shoot an enemy, and you can see blood comes out when the enemy dies. So the problem is that the blood's showing over lots of the nodes in the scene, and it's not rotating towards the enemy's velocity. And that's a problem because when we kill an enemy, we want the blood to be angled where the enemy was killed, because it'll just give a more authentic blood effect. So to do this, we're going to be saying a reference to get our blood particles. I'm just going to do var blood particles instance equals global.instance, and that basically gets the blood particles that we instanced in our scene. So now that we have a variable of it, we can do blood particles instance dot rotation equals velocity dot angle. So make sure that you're setting these variables as blood particles instance and not the blood particles, because you're going to have problems when you're trying to set a loaded scene to another instance. Okay, so now we're setting our rotation to our velocity.angle. So what does velocity.angle do? It basically just gets the angle of our vector which is an X and the Y value, and we're getting the angle of that and where we're moving. And that returns in radians, and that's why we're using rotation and not degrees. So that's why we're doing blood particles.rotation equals velocity.angle. And if you wanted to use degrees instead of radians, if you want to do rotation degrees, Godot has a good function that is rad to deg, which will convert the radians to degrees. So if you want to use degrees, you could do it that way. I'm just going to leave it at rotation because that's just what works for me and it's a lot easier. Now we can save it and we can play. So you can see I shoot an enemy and blood shoots out the direction they die. Actually looks very nice and very smooth. Now we still have the problem where it's showing over lots of other nodes. So to fix this, I'm going to go in the blood particles scene right here, and I'm going to set our Z index. The Z index is like layering in Godot. It basically, any object with a higher Z index will be shown over other objects. So we're just going to set to like -5. I think -5 would be a good value to show everything over the blood particles. So now we can run it. And you can see now I kill an enemy. It shoots out blood. It looks amazing. We love to see blood everywhere. And there you go. You have blood shooting out of all the enemies. Obviously, there's still a lot of polish to be done to make this a more fun game. But for right now, having the blood and hit effects really helps out when you're getting feedback for the player. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I'll see you guys next time.